about value and about how it might emerge. So it really put the onus back on the communities to think about what sort of things they might value and how they might measure them. Now, Marnie grew up in an area of Canada that was labelled the worst neighbourhood in Canada because on certain types of measurements, admissions to hospital because of drug addiction, finishing high school, some of those standard measurements, this was the worst of the worst. But to go into that community and ask people, how do you value this community? And how do you know if this community is getting better? That's her key kind of question. And some of the answers and some of the data gathering techniques that were developed at a community level there were really striking and really interesting. But particularly the kinds of conversations that mechanism stimulated, I think, had real kind of value. So for the work that we do in our centre in terms of community-based arts practice, that question of democratising the gathering of information and democratising the research process has been really interesting. And I guess it's a question for Hassan. These techniques that you mentioned, how specialised are they and how democratised can they be?
Yeah, I mean, I think... The ultimate challenge, of course, is to collect data on a consistent basis across organisations and critically across time. I mean, economists often talk about the importance of longitudinal data. And the reason why it's important to do that is not just because more data is better, although, obviously economists like data, but it's just that a lot of the research questions we're interested in concern causal relationships. If an arts funder does this, will we achieve this impact? So even if we can measure the impact of the value, the question then is, what are we going to do with that valuation data? Well, it's generally because we want to understand causal relationships, how to make more value. And to actually test for causal relationships is very, very complex because variables, like value and investment tend to be jointly determined by other characteristics. Societies that put a lot of money into culture are likely to have successful sort of cultural sectors and cultural activities, but that could be for reasons that are independent of the funding. It could be some underlying sort of cause through the education system or the outlook. So you need to collect longitudinal data which will allow economists to try and unpick these causal relationships. So it is absolutely essential to collect data using these methodologies on a consistent basis. And it can be done. And one of the things that's very frustrating as an economist is this preconception that collecting data like this is really expensive. It's prohibitively expensive for small organisations. It's not the case. And certainly the observational methods that we were sort of talking about earlier. I mean, the anecdote that I sort of give about this is that field experiment that we did with the National Theatre. Not the survey stuff. The survey data collection is expensive. But the field experiment bit where we basically just looked at postcode data at the theatre. And what we agreed with the National Theatre is which cinemas would participate in the experiment. That cost £0 to do. Because what we were doing there, the